Hey, but this is Dark Rose, and welcome back to another video. And it's been a few days since I posted last. I took a bit of a break to focus on schoolwork rather than just dig in and continue doing my almost daily video run of different progress on different mods. Now, I've got back into working on mods again after, of course, short break. Done with almost all my classes here. The 14th, I'm completely, utterly done with college, which is going to be amazing, as I'll have a ton of free time to work on a ton of projects. Doesn't necessarily mean I'll be working on modding nonstop, as I do have to actually start focusing on making money to do all the real life and adult stuff. But it does mean that there will be more time for various different tasks. Now, what I want to get into this video is to talk about a little bit of performance changes I'm doing with ICBM Classic. Now, the plan was to, of course, work on Atomic Science as soon as I was done, but we're not done yet. So instead, we're going to do little bitty performance tweaks and adjustments and stuff like that until I get to the point where I no longer have to write 50-page papers, 10-page papers, so on and so on. I literally did turn in a 52-page paper of a final report on a team project that I ran. I'll have to show that off sometime. It's a really cool project. Anyways, to get into these circles, these are nuclear blasts. With the latest beta release, which I just popped out yesterday, I know I normally do these on Fridays, but somebody was having issues with Sponge, with the threads not working, so I dug at it, I fixed those problems, took a lot of problems. It seemed there was a mix of issues between the threads not running properly, and the threads, even though one tweaked, was still not quite working. It turned out that it had nothing to do with the threads at all, that was causing Sponge to break. And it turned out that there's an entity that we use to kind of do the tick manager. It doesn't actually do any of the calculations, it just exists so that way when the thread's done, it can trigger all the code in the rain world. Eventually I'm going to do away with all this because it's a bit of an annoyance, but it's just temporary holdover from the old version. But there's an entity that sits at the very bottom of the world. And it sits there, and it waits, and 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 when the thread finally finishes, it then ticks over and does all the damage in the world. Well, it turned out that for some beyond reason I still have yet to figure out, Sponge was kicking off the tick rate at a different rate than was expected, so it was skipping the pre-setup tick. And I still have yet to figure this out, so I don't know if it's a Sponge problem or if it's a problem that is a vanilla Minecraft that I've just yet to notice. But the pre-calculation stuff was not ticked off, which means the thread was never turned on and the thread never could run, which then resulted in the explosions never being done. That's all been fixed. That took basically 2 days of tinkering around with the fix. Not only did I fix that, I improved the performance of the threads, I changed how they were created, how they're tracked, how they dump blocks back into the blast code, how they tell that they're completed, everything else. A lot of different code. I could actually go scroll through it really, really quick. Here's the thread. We're going to talk about this in a second. But you get something like Blast Nuclear. Blast Nuclear actually is a really simple blast. Literally, you get the pre-code, which spawns the blast. You get some particle code, which runs, which, by the way, if the blast doesn't run long enough, it will not spawn a mushroom cloud. So there's actually a bug that's up on there on the tracker where the mushroom cloud isn't spawning, and I finally figured out why. It's just if your computer runs too fast, you won't get the particle effect, so there's going to be some changes you have to do to make sure that actually gets ticked over and it works properly. Of course, you get the Do Explode, which actually, of course, does a little bit more particle effect down here. So you get some particles up here, you get some particles down here. I think this one's the shockwave that goes out. We'll definitely do some more documentation to figure that out. But then you get the point where thread completed. When thread completed, it does an end of explosion, and then which then calls Do Post, which then does all the actual placement. So this will go through and place every single block in the game, does all the explosion ticks on it, does all the code on it, and everything else. So that's all been changed, all been worked on, tons of little bits been cleaned up, tons of documentation, massive amounts of debug have been added. You'll see this stuff throughout the code nonstop. You can actually go into the configs now, and there's now a config to debug the threads and a config to debug the explosives. This one will print out a lot of information about the threads. This one will print out the logic that's going on. It will not do block placement because that'll be too spammy. But it'll tell you when the pre runs, the init runs. It'll tell you when various things happen. So if you are having problems with your server and you want to figure out what's going on before reporting a bug to me, you can flip these two things on and kind of look at it. It's a bit spammy, it's not easy to read. It gets you there though. But onto the performance things, because this is just kind of like changes in code that it doesn't really matter much. The performance changes themselves have been done to the large explosion. I still have to do this small explosion. Small explosion will happen eventually. This one's basically just vanilla TNT with some small tweaks to make it work better. But the large explosion is a completely different rework. This was originally written by Cal Clavi with some help from a few other developers. It works well, but there was issues with it performance-wise, and there still is a lot of problems with it, which we'll go over here in a second. But the main performance changes is I switch over to storing all the doubles up here. This shouldn't guarantee that we're not using as much memory. On top of that, I got rid of the pause code. Now, there was a lot of pause code where basically what we do is you go new pause X, Y, Z, and we were creating 2 to 3 of these per cycle loop, so wasting tons of memory, causing garbage collector to have to run, causing extra time to build those objects. Now we just calculate down here, going back to a much older version. I believe the 1.5.2 version did this, and 1.6 it got changed over to the vector system, and of course my update I changed it over to my position system, which is a more modern version of the vector system from the old Resident Engine system. But that's been changed over. That has actually created a noticeable performance boost. Threads are running about a third faster just because of that change. I also made sure that we now have kill checks in here, so that if you go to close the world, if the world unloads, or you close the server or whatever, it should now kill properly. On top of killing properly as well, the threads are now marked as daemon threads, which will guarantee that they do shut off properly. So if you close Minecraft, the JVM will murder these threads and make sure they turn off, so that you don't have to worry about your client stalling up. That was an issue that I did notice it still exists in the 1.7 version, and I will definitely have to go fix. But that's been fixed. There's been a lot of documentation. I've gone through, documented all of this, but there's still a few issues. Of course, I now can track performance, which is great. I can tell exactly how long these are taking. Most of the threads, like the nuclear blast, takes about 200 milliseconds on my computer. I'm running something that is basically equivalent to between an i3 and an i5. So it's not the greatest, but it's not the worst, and it still takes 200 milliseconds to run. So if you're running a server that's definitely being hosted by a company like Acculus, you're going to see this probably run in like 30 milliseconds. So you don't have to worry about the larger explosions taking too long. So that all looks good. Now, the problems we're still trying to figure out is if you've been paying attention to the patterns and stuff here. I've been trying to figure out why in the world it's skipping blocks. This is a big problem that's still going on, and this is not the actual crater the way it looks. We'll go float over here and I'll show you what the actual crater is. I'm toying around with the mathematics, and I turned off a lot of the randomization features. So if you turn off the randomization features, you end up with a crater that looks a lot more uniform in nature. For example, that's what an actual crater for a nuke looks like. This is with a little bit of different changes. So you see that's a perfect crater. These are kind of what they look like with the randomization turned on, and you end up with basically some weird behavior. Like this one, actually, the randomization I believe is actually turned off on this one. This one actually has it on. So you end up with basically a distorted looking crater, which looks really, really good. Unfortunately, you end up with a lot of floating blocks and stuff, which is something I do really want to fix. Because even though it is Minecraft, the floating blocks do make sense. They do need to be solved. At least what I could do is maybe have the blocks be thrown around. What I might do is just run a double pass on the nuclear explosion. It'll take longer, but it would solve the problem. But without a fix I actually did, because I actually made a few fixes and adjustments to the code. So one of the fixes I did do is we now run half steps instead of actually running full steps. This actually has made the code run much, much better. I believe I did this with the EMP code for ICBM 2. It has a very similar problem with it. Of course, these code sets are very similar to each other. But that kind of solved it, made the circle more uniform instead of more randomized, but you get a lot of problems. And if we go over here, which I showed a couple screenshots of this off on Twitter and Discord, this is what sparked the investigation to figure out what was wrong with the problem in the first place. Now, this crater we were approaching up here is a 500-meter crater that I detonated to test the performance of the blasts, as well as the new command system, which I'll get into the end of the video if I don't forget, is that we added a command system. But you end up with this scattered blast pattern. It looks really good when you think about it, and actually creates this really distorted landscape. I'm not even sure I want to fix it, because it actually looks beautiful. You end up with this kind of memorizing pattern, but it looks too clean is the problem. That's one of the issues I really want to fix, is you can sit here and you can look at this and you can clearly tell it's an algorithm, because you start seeing the triangle diamond patterns going through it as it goes out into the distance. And this is caused by issues with precision, where when the blast is going out, it's not hitting every block as it pathfinds, which once again we have determined is kind of fine. What I just need to do is maybe add a double pass where if it finds a single block floating like this, it tries to throw it out in the distance. That'll add to a bit more of the visual, make it look a little nicer and everything else. But yeah, so looks good at that. Now the part I was talking about with the command system, the newest version of beta actually just added a command system where you can fire off all the blast types, short of the missiles, from commands. So if you run in command blocks and you want to do some cool blast, like set an EMP off or something like that, you can do that. They should run from the console equally from command blocks and players. Should work really, really well. And they generate blasts properly in addition to that, so you shouldn't have any problems with events not firing correctly. I may look into maybe disabling events if you want the command blocks to bypass event systems. But let's get out here where we can get a little bit distance from existing craters and set off a couple of them just to show how they work. And we'll just do the nuclear blast, because I think I already still have it in the console. So yeah, I still got it there. So let's get out of that and drop down here. Now you do get a scale with this, so when you go to set off, this is the most basic version, ICBM CD Blast. The ID of the explosion, you can get this from the code, or you can run list, which will tell you all the different explosion types you can run. But we're going to run Nuclear Blast, and we're going to run the scale. Scale is going to times whatever the normal radius is by 1. So we're going to get a normal blast radius, which, there we go, we get an actual blast of that. And this, of course, is running without the randomization still, since I'm testing code. And you can see, even with that randomization, we still end up with blocks right here and here. Especially this. If I can just solve this problem right here, I think I'll be happy with the explosion code. But you can actually increase the scale with this. So say we want to run an explosion that's half the size and still nuclear. There we go, half the size of that one. Now you can do any size you want as long as it's above 0, because if you try to do, like, say, -1, it's going to yell at you. And if you try to do something like, you can do something like this size, you're just not going to get any damage. It's not going to hold your hand the entire time, but you can do little small explosions, so if you want to do some cool stuff, it's there. For those who want to add mod support, this is a great way for you guys to actually implement mod support. You don't have to use a command. The blast itself actually have this code on it. So if you want to trigger a blast and you want to change the scale, so if you want to make a grenade or a rifle round or something like that, that then detonates with an ICBM explosion, the code is there and available for you. But of course, you can also scale this up to a much higher size. It does take a bit to run. This is where I was talking about I do want to solve a lot of the performance issues. I do want to fix the randomization first, and then I'm going to come back in and I'm going to do a lot of the stuff that I do currently with ICBM 2, which is going to be taking time to place the blocks. Of course, there's going to be a lot of other changes that are going to come in here, but that's about it for now. I'll see you guys later with more videos, and hopefully we'll get into a lot more content quicker now that I'm going to be out of school. I'll more than likely start streaming again. It's going to start off gradual and slow because I'll have to get back in the habit of streaming and actually doing that daily. If you guys can't tell, I don't have a normal sleep schedule and it's almost completely random. A good example of this is now my lunchtime, which is why we're recording the video. It's 6 o'clock, actually it was 7 o'clock, and I consider this lunch, so that gives a good idea. Anyways, I'll see you all later.